will ask maybe to Georges Choucair now, and I'm sure some of you already know. He's a producer based in Lebanon, working a lot with Europe and Lebanese filmmakers, co-produced by France, a lot of French co-production, but also Germany and other countries. So please, Georges, tell us more about you.
Hi. So the market where I'm working in is maybe totally new. Maybe the structure is not the same, but it's again a small country with a small audience. But the real difference with Europe, of course, is there is no market. There is no industry. It was, in my opinion, born maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And there is no soft money and there is no equity, no distribution. It was totally new. So I began 10 years ago with a project with a really simple strategy, is to do small movies with small money, to be able to raise this money and to go to festivals and to try to build a lineup, to be able to wait for the structure of the market. And in this region, something very important happened 10 years ago, which was the festivals, Dubai, Doha, Abu Dhabi, to be able to raise money, soft money, which is not paid by the states or by Lebanon, but by the festivals, which was help for us. But the restructure, with the real way to produce in Lebanon for us, and maybe in Palestine and in the Arabic countries, are the co-production with Europe, which is very important for us. So it is, my opinion, very difficult to do it without Europe and with all the co-production strategies. And the first year I produced a movie. It was a movie with maybe one institution. It was CNC, the Cinéma du Monde. At time it was Fond Sud. And now my last movie was produced by, the structure was with the Cinéma du Monde and the World Cinema Fund in Germany and Sundance, and it was selected in the Berlinale Talent in Venice, and so the structure is now better, and you have the support of Doha, of course, and Afaq in Lebanon. So the production market is evolving and is very how to say it, was very dependent on the co-production with Europe. But equity is trying to help us. We have now one or two funds that help us in the production market, and so this is how we try to do it. The new thing in the Middle East now is the distribution, the TVs. We worked without TVs and without distribution. Now we have pre-sales, which is a good thing for the structure of the financial plan, and the new market of the commercial movies, which are more or less equity project, and it helps us to open the market. So we have a new thing in Lebanon, which is the screens. The market is bigger than 10 years ago, so we're able to have more commercial movie, which helps the market. We are producing maybe 20 or 30 movies a year, not feature all, of course, documentaries and shorts, and voilà.
Thank you, Georges. Maybe our next will be David. So David Hurst is a Bordeaux-based producer in France. We've been partners on a film this year, which was the first Ethiopian film which ever went to official selection in Cannes. We co-produced this film, and David had an experience before with Abel Ferrara also. He has co-produced Pasolini by Abel Ferrara. So David.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. So, as Laurent said, I'm based in Bordeaux, which is a city in the southwest of France. Lots of people know it for the wine, but it's also a territory where we do lots of cinema. So I'm quite a young producer. I've been doing production for not quite 6 years. And for me, co-production is really essential in the way I've progressed as a producer. So I consider myself as a French producer before anything else. And as a French producer, I can have access to national funds. And I can, of course, go to see national French televisions. But I'm also a regional producer because France is divided into regions. And each region has funds for culture and cinema in particular. And Bordeaux is in a region which is very strong on cinema and on independent cinema, on creation. So it's quite a nice area to be based to do independent films. So as I said, co-production for me started by being something which helped me to gain experience, because I started by doing projects as a minoritaire minor producer in a production, helping producers which have more experience than me to get funds from the region, for example. So thanks to that, I learned a whole lot of things, and now I also position myself as a major producer on international films. For the moment, it's more like documentaries for the moment, but slowly I'm getting to fiction feature films as well. So yes, co-production as a way to start, as a way to gain experience. Co-production as well as a way to do really ambitious projects, because as you all know, I suppose, when you do independent films, it's very difficult to finance, so it's much more easy and much more interesting to be several producers, and so we can bring, as everybody has said, different financing and different perspectives as well on a subject and on a project. So, voilà. Just to add as well, maybe that for me, co-production also means co-producing with fellow producers in France or elsewhere in the world, but also with TVs. In France, we have national and local televisions which co-produce films, and sometimes I co-produce films only with a television, and sometimes with a television and another producer. And even if we start by a co-production with the television, we can, after that, go towards theater distribution. I don't think that's been said yet, but in France, it's quite, it's more or less easy to get a co-production with the television if you have a good project, and then you can, that's a sort of a first step to go to theater and distribution in theaters. I can maybe talk about two projects. The first big international project I worked on was Pasolini by Abel Ferrara. So he's a major, international American director, and this film, his last film, was produced only by European producers. In the US, he can't find producers, so he came to France. I mean, he's been doing that for quite a while now, but he started the development of this film with a producer in France called Capricci. So Capricci was the first one to develop the project with Ferrara, and then the first step for Capricci was to find Arte, national French television. And then after that, he started to find producers elsewhere in Europe. So there was a Belgian producer which helped with post-production and also tax refund. Obviously, the film was shot in Italy, in Rome, so there was an Italian producer for the line producing in Italy, but also for Italian funds, MIBAC. And he also came to me because, as I said, as a regional producer in France, I have access to this specific fund in the Bordeaux area, and I was able to get the fund through a selective process. And after that, I sent technicians from the Bordeaux area to the shoot in Rome. And I also welcomed Ferrara for the editing in Bordeaux for nearly 3 months. And that was a fantastic experience. And I think this film is very illustrative of co-production because it's a major director and the film is absolutely beautiful, but financing it was extremely difficult, and the film just wouldn't have existed, although it is Ferrara with Willem Dafoe. The film wouldn't have existed if there wasn't these co-productions and these 3 countries bringing different talents and different and engaging themselves in different parts of the production. And
sorry, what was the budget of the film?
The budget was 2.4 million euros. Not that big. And just to finish, at the moment, I can just talk of 2 projects I have. I also still do short films because for me it's a way to find talents and experience things. So for the moment I'm developing quite an important short film which will be shot in Algeria. So very soon I will be looking for a co-producer in Algeria. I don't even know if that exists. I'm sure it does, but I haven't had a look yet. Another example, just to give you an example, is I met recently in a festival in France on a Latin America cinema. I met a Brazilian director who lives in Cuba and who is doing a documentary, a feature documentary on the Cuban Revolution, and I won't go into the detail, but so on this project he has already got financing from Brazil as a Brazilian director. I will bring funds from France and probably Cinéma du Monde, for example, which also works for documentaries. And then we will find also, we hope to find also partners in Cuba.
Just one word because you said that you have this regional fund. One word about your obligations. Are they very tough obligations? Is it something quite flexible? How do you work when you have these funds from the region? What is the obligation for you as a producer to spend inside the region?
Well, I'm very lucky because in the Bordeaux area, what is called Aquitaine for the moment, it is very flexible. I mean, they have 4 criteria, and we have to respect 2 to be able to engage ourselves on the project. The 4 criteria are local producer, local director, shoot, or engagement of local talents, technicians, crew. Voilà. So, for example, on Pasolini, there was a local producer, and there wasn't any shoot in Aquitaine, but we did the editing and we sent crew in Italy. So, but it's very exceptional. In France, even in France, the spending normally has to be at least not more than what the region has given, but at least to the amount of what the region has given. And in my region, it's not the case. They are very strong on creation projects, on independent projects, so they don't look too much about the criteria of spending. They want to have a producer like me, and I'm not the only one, who engages myself in these kind of projects, and that's the biggest aim.
Okay, thank you, David. Felipe, you're the last one. I think you are the youngest one around this table, not the less experienced, but the youngest one. I read that so you're based in LA, you set up your company like 10 years ago, I think, and you were working with Fox Searchlight before, is that yes. Right? So please tell us, because I know that you are both producing independent US films and also co-producing projects with Europe, so yes. It's really interesting to hear you about that.
So as an American, I'm from Colombia, South America, and then work in Los Angeles. And I think the funny thing is that for us, as an American producer, I exclusively look for projects that I can make outside of America. And there's no current project that I have that is to be set in America. And so the last two projects that I did, one was a Belgian-UK co-production, but that we shot in France with Belgian crews to maximize that tax credit. And then the film after that, last year, was a UK-Irish co-production. And every time that I evaluate a project, and I'm a writer as well, the first thing I ask is, what passports does the writer have? And the same with filmmakers. And the way that we look at it, and I have a company set up in Munich as well. My partner is Austrian but lives in Munich. And we have a company set up in the UK as well as Munich. And all of this is so that we can co-produce films in Europe and be valuable partners to everyone on this panel, as well as yourselves, and that's really the only way that we can try to make meaningful movies, movies for a meaningful budget with a meaningful amount of days, to actually get a good movie in the can. And so, and I think, it's interesting, at least for this panel, that the opening night film was Room, which is a very American independent film in kind of spirit and subject matter. But that was a movie that was done as an Irish. The lead producer at Guiney and Element is the leading producer in Dublin, but he did it as an Irish Canadian co-production with some friends of mine in Canada, and that movie would have been made in the U.S. for less than $1 million, and there's no way in the world that they would have ever cast Alison Brie, but because that they had different soft monies and the tax credits in place, they had a little bit more freedom. Not only did they not make it for $1 million, but they made it for well over that. I believe it was around $7 million. They were able to cast whoever they wanted, and they were able to make a fantastic movie. And so that I think is a perfect example of why we do what we do, which is avoiding the United States. And I think, I'm based in Los Angeles so that I can have a direct relationship with all of the, actors, representatives, as well as the filmmaking representatives. But all of our projects are, reverse engineered to work as international co-productions. And so also working a lot with Scandinavia, which is very attractive on many levels, Australia, South Africa, Ireland, which is great, and then recently in Munich, Munich is announcing more and more incentives, and so they just announced an additional one. They have a English language co-production fund through Bavaria, which is very attractive, and so you can get north of 50% of your budget from a combination of 3 different tax credits and soft monies that are available in the region. So that is how I look to structure all of my between co-productions as well as foreign sales. And so all of my films we pre-sell internationally, a certain percentage of the budget. The rest is tax credits, and then if there is an equity position, an at-risk capital, we try to keep it as little as possible. So the movie that we did in Ireland was a $5 million budget, and in that we had probably like $300,000 at risk, and the rest was soft monies and tax credits and pre-sales.
Okay. You set up your company 10 years ago in LA, right? And
Yes.
what was the first energy to do it? I'm curious about it. I mean, you worked for a studio before. And
Yes.
why did you leave? And what was the energy? I mean,
So I worked at Fox Searchlight, which at that time was the height of American independent film. So when I was there, we did Sideways, we bought Garden State, we bought Napoleon Dynamite, both which were huge hits domestically. And then what else was the last one in that period? One Sideways, Garden State, the one with the with the van and the cute little girl singing at the end. Yes, Little Miss Sunshine. So that was kind of the height of American independent film, and everybody and all the other studios were then starting divisions to kind of emulate Fox Searchlight, because Fox Searchlight had started in like 1991, and so had a huge advantage on the other companies. And so Warner Brothers started one, and then Focus was already there, but kind of became more aggressive, and then many other smaller ones. And so I was working for the head of the company, who now runs a large chunk of News Corp, and he wanted me to stay, but I went out and raised a bunch of money to do precisely that, American independent film for this market, where in Sundance they were selling movies for a ton of money, and it was like playing the lottery, and actually our first movie was one of those. We made a movie for $500,000. We sold it to Harvey Weinstein for $4 million in a bidding war, so it was an exciting time. And as soon as that happened, after that movie happened, the bottom fell out of the market, and it quickly became a distribution system which was essentially kind of a bunch of chop shops where they were just trying to spend as little as possible and then break up your film for the ancillary value. And so from an economic standpoint, it made no sense. From an economic standpoint, you couldn't make finance plans that were viable for films, as well as it wasn't a market that you wanted to work in, because it was a market that you knew wasn't going to like, for example, The Hallow, which is a movie that the last one that was like an Irish-UK co-production, it was kind of a best-case scenario in terms that it played at all the festivals, it premiered at Sundance, it got incredibly good reviews. We did terrible theatrically in the UK, or in the US. Our main market was the UK, but like our highest grossing market was Mexico, oddly.
I know that you are also a writer, and for example, so you have write, I think, an adaptation of a very famous French novel, which is Madame Bovary. And at what stage of the development did you go for co-production? That's my question, because do you have all the creative package of the film in place, and then you go to find monies and maybe set up a company in Europe or in Munich? I don't know at what stage why you did this.
Yeah,
what is the process?
That project was 100% reverse engineered to work within that structure, and so because I did write it, I was home over the holidays. My mom had always had Madame Bovary by her bed since I was a kid, and I remembered reading it in high school and some very beautiful, like, cinematic moments, and so then I just started to reread it, and kind of very cynically I was like, oh, I could get Mia Wasikowska or Emma Watson to do this movie, because what girl under 25 doesn't want to shoot a period movie in France? And sure enough, they all wanted to do the movie, not because the script was great, but because I was cynically correct, and that's how the movie came about. And so it was, then Paul Giamatti and other great members of cast, but it was really from the beginning, the idea was to try to do that movie. We did for about 13 million, and I would say over 5 to 6 million was from tax credits and soft monies. So that one was kind of the first test, I would say, where it was kind of reverse engineered from the beginning to be a European co-production. And now when we look at projects, like I said, even though I'm a writer, the first thing when someone's pitching me a project, I, again, cynically and reductively say, where's the writer from? Where's the director from? Because otherwise, I'm very limited in the US to making films, and that's why in the US now you see just all these mumblecore movies that are made for under $1 million or even way less, because the market can't sustain anything beyond that.
Thank you, Felipe. So maybe we would love to discuss with you about that. So please, if you have questions to one of our panelists, feel free to ask your question, and don't be shy.
Just wanted to ask, what do you mean by reverse engineered? And my second question, for some reason, I thought Madame Bovary was some private investment was into it. Pre-Science, I think, has it on its. So my question is.
What's the question with?
What's reverse engineered, and also because I thought that Madame Bovary had some private investment in it. I was wondering if it's a success in terms of return, if it's a success financially for the people who have invested money in it.
I don't want to speak for them. In some cases, no. We've worked a lot with Prescience, but Prescience is mostly like a senior lender. So they lend against our tax credits, our foreign sales. And so on any given movie, for example, we will, let's say it's a $5 million, we're doing a movie right now, or hopefully right now, in the coming first quarter of next year. In Mexico, that's a $5 million budget. A UK foreign sales company called Hanway has sold 2 million of that. And then a company like Prescience is not involved in this project, but they would then bankroll all of our pre-sales, as well as what's the gap, which is kind of the remaining unsold territories, which they will devalue at 50% of their established value, supposedly. It's still a risky investment, but it is considered a collateralized debt.
Can I ask another question?
Yes.
This is an advice, actually. I have a film that's set, most of it in South Africa, and I'm not African at all. I'm Lebanese and Syrian. So do you think I have any luck getting financed just by the territory and my nationality?
So I haven't worked in South Africa. I don't know if anyone else
Because you
here.
mentioned South Africa.
Yes,
that's why.
So South Africa is a very interesting place to shoot films because they have a great tax credit, as well as they have regional monies, as well as they have incentives for South African investors to invest in films. And then lastly, it's inexpensive to shoot compared to parts of Europe, for instance. So you can get a lot of bang for your buck in South Africa. And in the case of South Africa, you do not need to, you'll get more if you are from South Africa, but you don't necessarily need to be. And then South Africa has a lot of interesting kind of co-production incentives with Germany, but also, but with all the kind of former kind of UK Commonwealth countries like Australia, Canada, etc. Yes, and they have enough money, yes.
Where are you based? Sorry, where are you based?
I'm Lebanese Syrian. I live here. I'm Lebanese Syrian, and I live here.
So yeah, I would say that you would want to find a producer who's either based in Germany or in the UK who has a tax credit, or who has in a country where there is a co-production deal between South Africa and that country, and that way you'll be able to maximize the amount of money available.
And I don't have to be German?
No, for example, a good friend of mine who's Danish is doing a film right now in South Africa, and he's getting over 50% of his budget from South Africa.
Could I just ask a question for Georges? Just about, in terms of working in Lebanon, producing there, are you focusing more on French language or Arabic language films? And is that a big decision to you, whether you shoot in Arabic or French or the language? What do you think of the kind of the overall prospects for Arabic language cinema?
No, the movie usually are in Arabic, but the problem is, well, not the problem, but because the language is important for the fund, the European funds, usually the directors are trying to put some foreign language, and because Lebanon is a country where you talk 3 languages, it happens to be usually doable. So if you go to Aide du Cinéma du Monde, or even Avance sur recette, if you have, you're supposed to have half of the movie at 51% in French, but if you have 3 languages, if the French language is the 3rd plus 1, you can apply. So you have a lot of projects trying to have French language in the movie to be able to raise this soft money, which is €500,000, and to be able to get to the French market. So yes, sometimes we can raise money through the languages and trying to have this part not just in Arabic but in French or in English. So you have some tricks like this, but when it's authentic for the project and for the script, and the screenwriter is doing a good job, it's doable. But no, it's Arabic language usually, and it's a big problem for us because the market is small, and it's not easy to sell it. But now we have some project in Arabic that succeeded in the Europe, so maybe now it's more easier to demonstrate that a good project, even in foreign language and not in English, is capable to have a good market.
For Mr. Georges, what would you advise a non-Arab filmmaker making a documentary in Lebanon? Where would you go for co-production or funding?
There is two funds for documentary, SIP and AFAC, and I think and even in Doha you have in the fund for documentary. TV are, in my opinion, are very, very good in financing documentaries. There's pre-sales, and there is a big market. You have Jazeera or a lot of big TVs in the Middle East financing documentary.
Okay, so basically it would be a TV co-production, but not something within...
TV and funds.
Okay.
You have funds.
They're locked out. Even if you're making a film in UAE, you're a UAE citizen for 10 plus years. It locks you out.
You don't. Maybe you need a producer, Lebanese producer for the Lebanese funds, but you can apply, and there is money. Yes, it's not just TV. Before it was just TV. Yes, opposite of the cinema. Cinema we're trying to find. We began with financing with private money, soft through Europe, and now we have pre-sales. In documentaries, the opposite. Pre-sales TV, and now you have funds with soft money in documentaries, which is new. 3 funds, which is good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm actually a journalist, so I'm not here as a professional, but people tend to look to Europe as a sort of mecca for funding, and we have lots of panels about co-production and how you can get people to fund your films. But how interested are you really in films from this region? And how easy is it really for a filmmaker to tap into this money? Because often the budgets here are quite small, and they find that it's difficult really to find meaningful partners. They can't reciprocate in funding. And I was just sort of interested from Felipe, Krista, and David. Are you looking for Arab language projects or to work with filmmakers from this area? And how realistic do you really think it is for people to work to set up these partnerships?
Krista, would you like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, to me personally, I think it's more and more interesting as the Middle East is very much a melting pot of what is happening right now in politics, and right now Sweden is taking along lots of 150,000 refugees from Syria, and the appearance of refugees and people from the Middle East in Scandinavia is growing all the time, and I think there's also alongside with that a growing interest in looking into stories and both documentaries and features, showing stories from the Middle East or stories where the Middle East is connected to Europe, to Scandinavia. So I find it really interesting. And a couple of weeks ago, I was in Cairo, meeting with people working with culture, and I really understood that the circumstances under which they are working is really tough, but the connections, with a democracy like Sweden can mean a lot. For these creative people, being brave enough to make contemporary stories that are touching the subjects of democracy or free speech, freedom of speech, or similar subjects. So I think it's really interesting to me and to an audience, but to what extent that audience is big, I don't know, I don't care. I think it's important. It's also important to build bridges on the cultural side alongside with what's happening now in Middle East and Europe.
One big example for me is the movie The Lamb, the movie Laurent produced. In my opinion, the way it's working is when the market and the European producers are choosing projects very specific to region. When you have a story who's written and told by one guy or woman, and he's the only person to be able to do this story. So Lamb, a story with the kids and his lamb in Ethiopia, was typically these kinds of stories interesting for Europe to begin with, because if it's a normal story, somebody cheating on somebody else in the same building, it's not very interesting, because Europe you can do it better with more money. But when you have stories like Lamb, it's more specific. And another project, I think last year or 2 years ago, a Seuji project, Wajda, about a girl who wanted to do bicycle, and it was forbidden in Abyss. So it was like a window in this country, very specific to the country, and of course, subject about women and liberty. So these are the projects, in my opinion, who very interesting for the Western and for the European producers.
I think from my perspective, definite interest. But I mean, part of the reason why I came to this festival was partly to see what was available. I mean, I know Doha is doing things. I know that there are incentives here. It's for me, it's partly just kind of educating myself on what's available and what can be done.
And just to add my point of view, obviously, in France we are touched much more since the beginning of the year by the issues in Syria. But historically, France has already been very concerned about the Middle East and also Maghreb, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. So historically, there's that. And also, if you look at the 12 projects which have been selected by the Dubai Film Connection, what is interesting is that you have all the projects talk about the big history, the democracy, identity, women, etc. But in all of the projects, there are also very strong intimate personal stories, and that anybody can relate to that. And for instance, French televisions, they can go for that quite easily because of the cohabitation of the two aspects, big history and small story.
Yeah, I think that's important what Georges pointed out. What is quite tricky with co-production is that you have to, the basis is to respect, of course, the soul of the story and its personal energy. So I remember when we started to organize a lot of systems and law and treaties in Europe, there were some films that we called European puddings, which were some kinds of cakes with no taste, and an actor from England, a producer from there, and a crew from there, etc. And the films at the end were like, neutral, nothing. Marketed, but nothing. And that's very important. And for the films you were talking about, there can be a huge audience. Wajda, for example, the film from Saudi Arabia, it did more than 400,000 admissions in France. And so much loved, Nabila Ayouch, controversial last film. It's 250,000 admissions in theaters in France. Films from Iran, sometime in Separation. Ashghar Farhadi, 1 million ambitions on the French territory. So there is really a market, business, an economic system and model for films which respect their own roots and soul and can be co-production with people like you and us, I think.
And I would add that apart from ourselves, places like Fox or Netflix, most importantly, but Fox as well, are all very, very aggressively looking to do local language films in these regions, in the Middle East as well as in other parts of the world that have been underserved by local language product. And they've been successful doing that.
Hello, my name is Sami. From an actor point of view, I'd like to know how do these co-productions affect the selection of the cast, either for for different productions, either short film, feature film, or TV series.
Felipe or Christo?
Well, from my point of view, the artistic collaboration is really important, and you know, working with, involving lots of different regional funds or national funds, for instance, you're obliged to have an artistic collaboration, and you always have to choose to use that role in a creative way that gains the project. So, for instance, in the film Simon and the Oaks we made, there was a national collaboration thematically with Germany and Sweden. So we used a couple of German actors that spoke German in the film, and one of them won the national award for best actor in Sweden. And we also used a composer from Germany, and those values really added a quality for the film. So I think it's really a privilege and a responsibility you have as a producer to use this collaboration between different countries in order to lift the quality of the film as much as you can, and that is a big advantage, really.
Yeah. As far as like from an actor's perspective, if you're working within Europe, it's all based on a point system if you're going to qualify as a European production, and so you certainly need, if your director isn't European, let's say, that's a huge hit to your movie from the point basis, so then you will look to round out your cast as primarily European. So, you know, in Madame Bovary, for instance, it was a huge benefit to us. Our director was French, but Mia Wasikowska was also Polish, although she's from Australia, but she has a Polish passport. So that made it that much more viable for her to be in the lead. Had she not done it, we would have had to do it with a UK actor, for certainly, but certainly not an American actor.
Hello, I'm a Saudi writer-director, and when considering the co-producing approach, would you guys prefer that an entity speaks on my behalf, like a local production company, or the writer-director speaks to the one of you guys directly, like when emailing people, when looking for producers? What's more stronger as an approach?
Whether or not you approach a film from yourself as an individual or through a company that can act as a co-producing partner for one of our companies. I think, I mean, it's always easier if there is a producer on board already, because they speak the same language and they know what's available for that production. That said, I also believe that in this day and age of making movies, as a writer or a director, it is incredibly important that you know what we know from a producing standpoint, so that you don't write your films in a vacuum where your film cannot be made, because to the point of reverse engineering, it is very difficult to make films that are viable, and so, you know, we look to make projects that we don't develop much, but what we develop, we know how to make. And we won't sign on to anything that would be like, oh, that would be a cool movie, but I don't know how to make it. So it's very important, I think, and it's very sad too, because there's many talented filmmakers who have great ideas and great scripts and stuff, but it doesn't make sense to get that project made. So I think both, you know, educating yourself as well as, you know, working with a producer who knows and guides you in that process of, you know, creating your script or, you know, conceiving your projects is incredibly important.
Thank you. Christer, one last word. And
yeah, to us it's also really important that there is a producer on board and some local support, I mean, like distribution or some basic funding, because that shows us that the quality and the status of the project has a good level, because it's very hard to attach local money, let's say in Scandinavia, for a project from Egypt or Lebanon or Palestine. It's very hard to raise money in Sweden if you don't have a basic backup from your own country. So to me that's important, and you know, reaching that level, having a producer on board, you will also have the material needed for us to present the project in our country.
Okay, I think we are at the end of this panel. It's a good connection, thank you, because I think the next panel is about how to find a producer. So you see, we are just in the middle of the topic. So thanks to everyone, and hope to see you soon.